Andrew Lawson didn't knock. He used his fingerprint to unlock the penthouse door overlooking the Manhattan skyline, like he still owned everything inside it. The city lights reflected off the marble floors as he stepped in, the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering on his cashmere coat. 6 months in Beverly Hills with a runway model, and now he was back. He expected tears. He expected silence. He expected me. Instead, he found Samuel Carter sitting at the dining table beneath the crystal chandelier, a leather briefcase resting beside a silver MacBook Pro. My lawyer didn't stand. He didn't smile. He simply adjusted his glasses and looked at Andrew the way surgeons look at something already diagnosed. Andrew's jaw tightened. "What is this?" I closed my iPad slowly and rose from the velvet chair near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Central Park glowed beneath us, calm and distant, like another world untouched by betrayal. "This," I said evenly, "is accountability." He laughed once, sharp, dismissive, the same laugh he used on CNBC interviews when investors questioned him. The laugh of a man who believed control was permanent. "You're overreacting, Claire. I came home, didn't I?" Samuel opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, wire transfers, California LLC filings. $1 million moved quietly through shell accounts during the months he was building brand partnerships in Los Angeles. Andrew's face didn't change at first. Then it did. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. I met his eyes for the first time that night. There was no anger in me anymore. No shaking. No pleading. "You thought I didn't notice," I said softly. You thought I wouldn't look." The skyline behind him shimmered in silence. He had come back expecting forgiveness. What he walked into was an audit, and the night was only beginning. Andrew didn't sit down. He stayed standing at the head of the dining table, shoulders squared, hands braced against the polished marble, as if the penthouse itself were still his boardroom. The Manhattan skyline shimmered behind him, reflected in the floor-to-ceiling glass, like a kingdom he believed he still ruled. "This is ridiculous," he said finally. "You hired a forensic attorney over a misunderstanding?" Samuel Carter remained calm. $1 million isn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Lawson." Andrew's eyes shifted to me, not with guilt, with irritation. The same look he used when junior analysts asked inconvenient questions during quarterly reviews in the Park Avenue office. "You've been lonely," he said, lowering his voice, as if that explained everything. "I needed space. That doesn't give you the right to dig through private accounts." Private. The word almost made me smile. "Company funds aren't private," I replied, "especially when you're the fiduciary." He straightened. "Those were strategic allocations." "To a California LLC registered to a 27-year-old model?" Samuel asked evenly. Silence. Andrew's jaw flexed. For a moment I saw the calculation in his eyes, not regret. Strategy. He was already shifting positions in his head, looking for leverage. "You're making this ugly," he said to me. "We can handle this quietly." Quietly. Or like the private jet invoices disguised as development research trips. Like the hotel suites in Beverly Hills categorized under client relations. Like the diamond bracelet charged as executive gifting. I picked up a thin folder from the table and slid it toward him. "Open it." He hesitated. Then he did. Inside were copies of wire confirmations, internal approval emails bearing his digital signature, and a highlighted clause from our shareholder agreement. Andrew read it once, then again. "You wouldn't," he said softly. I felt something settle inside me. Steady, grounded. "For 6 months," I answered. "You assumed I wouldn't." His gaze hardened. "You think this gives you power?" "No," I said. "It proves I was never powerless." Samuel closed his briefcase with deliberate calm. "Mr. Lawson," he said, This is only the preliminary review. Andrew looked from the documents to me. For the first time since he walked in, he understood. This wasn't a wife reacting. This was a CFO responding. And the audit had just begun. Andrew used to say the company was his vision. He liked that word. Vision. It sounded cinematic on magazine covers and sharp in interviews. I saw opportunity where others didn't, he would tell reporters, seated in glass conference rooms overlooking the Hudson, Mont Blanc pen resting confidently between his fingers. What he never mentioned was who built the structure beneath that vision. Me. 10 years earlier, Lawson Development Group had been a struggling mid-size firm, bleeding cash after a failed waterfront acquisition. Investors were circling. Creditors were impatient. Andrew had charisma, but no containment strategy. I had spreadsheets. I still remember the night we sat on the floor of our first Tribeca condo, papers scattered around us, Chinese takeout growing cold. He was pacing. I was rebuilding cash flow models from scratch. "You're overthinking it," he'd said back then. "No," I answered quietly. "You're underestimating risk." By the end of that quarter, I had renegotiated 2 private debt structures, restructured vendor contracts, and implemented a compliance system that stopped the quiet leak draining the company dry. We survived. Then we grew. Andrew became the face. I became the firewall. Every acquisition passed across my desk before it ever reached a board vote. I reviewed projections on my MacBook long after midnight while he attended galas at the Plaza Hotel, charming donors and politicians. I stayed home when our son was sick and dialed into earnings calls from the hallway so he wouldn't wake. It never bothered me. I believed in partnership. But somewhere along the way, visibility became confused with value. Andrew began believing applause equaled ownership. That because cameras followed him, the foundation beneath him must be his alone. He forgot something fundamental. Numbers don't care about ego. They record patterns. They expose shifts. They reveal silence. 6 months ago, when expenses began rounding upward in odd increments, I noticed. When subsidiary transfers appeared without standard compliance flags, I noticed. When executive travel costs doubled without corresponding project codes, I noticed. I didn't confront him immediately. I observed. And tonight, standing across from the man who thought he had returned to reclaim control, I understood something clearly. He hadn't built this empire alone, and he had gravely underestimated the woman who kept it standing. Madison Vale had never asked for shell companies. She asked for photo shoots, runway calls, and contracts that kept her face on billboards along Sunset Boulevard. At 27, she understood image. She understood branding. She understood what it meant to be seen. What she didn't understand was corporate laundering. The first time she noticed something strange was not in Beverly Hills, not in the infinity pool overlooking the canyon, and not during the quiet dinners Andrew insisted remain private. It was in a FedEx envelope delivered to her condo in West Hollywood. Inside were documents she didn't remember signing. Madison stared at the pages, her manicured fingers hovering above legal language she barely recognized. Crescent Shore Holdings, LLC. Registered agent. Madison Vale. Her stomach tightened. She called Andrew that night. "It's just paperwork," he said casually. "Tax efficiency. Standard structuring." "But why is my name on it?" "Because I trust you," he answered smoothly. Trust. The word felt flattering at the time. Now, sitting alone at her kitchen island with the Los Angeles skyline glowing beyond her balcony, it felt different. Her phone buzzed with fashion campaign notifications, model call sheets, invitations. Yet her eyes stayed locked on the registered capital line. $1 million. She had grown up in Sacramento. Her father managed a tire shop. Her mother worked double shifts at a hospital. $1 million was not a number that moved quietly through her life. She Googled the company. Nothing. She searched the address, a commercial mailbox. The unease began spreading slowly, like ink in water. Back in Manhattan, as Andrew stood in the penthouse denying everything, he still believed Madison was an accessory. Decorative. Loyal. He didn't know she had already scheduled a consultation with an attorney, recommended by a stylist friend whose husband worked in finance. Madison wasn't calculating revenge. She was calculating risk. And for the first time since Andrew had entered her life with private jets and 5-star suites at the Ritz-Carlton, she realized something chilling. If this went public, she wouldn't be seen as a girlfriend. She would be seen as a co-conspirator. And Andrew Lawson had just made her name part of the paper trail. Andrew believed in contracts. He built his empire on them. Development agreements, investor commitments, lease guarantees. He trusted ink more than people. He trusted signatures more than promises, which is why it was almost poetic that the document threatening him now carried his own initials on every page. Samuel placed the prenuptial agreement on the table between us, sliding it forward with deliberate precision. "You drafted this," I reminded Andrew quietly. He didn't look concerned. Not yet. The prenup had once felt like an insult. Signed 12 years ago in a polished office overlooking Fifth Avenue, it protected Andrew's pre-marital holdings, shielded future growth, limited spousal claims. I had signed it without drama. At the time, when Lawson development was still fragile, I believed in partnership, not contingency planning. Andrew flipped through the pages confidently. "This protects me," he said. "You walked in with nothing. You walk out with what's yours." Samuel adjusted his glasses. "Respectfully, Mr. Lawson, that's only partially correct." Andrew's eyes narrowed. Samuel tapped a highlighted section halfway through the agreement. Clause 14, fiduciary conduct and material breach. If either party, Samuel read calmly, engages in financial misconduct that materially impacts jointly held business interests, the non-breaching party reserves the right to claim compensatory damages equal to documented losses. Andrew's expression shifted. "That's standard language," he said quickly. "It becomes relevant," Samuel replied. "When executive authority is used to redirect corporate funds for personal enrichment." Silence settled over the penthouse. I watched Andrew read the clause again. Slower this time. "You can't prove intent," he said, but the certainty was thinning. "We don't need to prove intent," Samuel responded evenly. "We only need to demonstrate breach." Andrew looked up at me then, not angry, not yet desperate, but calculating, searching for weakness, for hesitation. "You're going to burn the company to punish me?" he asked. I shook my head. "I'm going to protect the company," I said softly. "From you." For years, he believed the prenup secured his dominance, that it insulated him from consequence. What he failed to notice was the paragraph he insisted on including, because he believed he would never violate it. Tonight, the clause he drafted to guard against betrayal was turning against him. And for the first time, Andrew Lawson realized something terrifying. The contract did not favor the powerful, it favored the prepared. We thought Ethan was asleep. The argument had moved from the dining area toward the living room, our voices controlled but sharpened by years of restraint. Andrew hated being cornered. I hated being lied to. Between us stood a stack of documents that could dismantle everything we had built. Neither of us noticed the hallway light turn on. It was Samuel who saw him first. Ethan stood barefoot near the staircase, his navy pajama sleeves pushed up to his elbows, hair rumpled from sleep. He wasn't crying. He wasn't frightened. He was listening. Andrew's tone shifted instantly. "Buddy," he said, softening his voice, "you should be in bed." Ethan didn't move. His eyes went from his father to the papers, to me. "Are you firing Dad?" he asked quietly. The question sliced through the room. "No," Andrew answered quickly. "Of course not. This is just grown-up stuff." Ethan frowned slightly. He had inherited Andrew's sharp observation, but not his denial. "Mom doesn't fight about money unless something's wrong," he said. Silence. Andrew forced a smile. "Everything's fine." Ethan looked at me instead. Mom never lies about numbers. The simplicity of it landed heavier than any accusation. Children don't understand shell companies. They don't understand fiduciary clauses or wire transfers routed through California. But they understand patterns, tone shifts, the difference between confidence and performance. Andrew opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time that night, he wasn't facing a lawyer. He was facing a witness. I walked toward Ethan and knelt in front of him, keeping my voice steady. "You don't need to worry about this," I said gently. "Grown-ups are fixing a problem." He studied my face, searching for confirmation. "You're not leaving, right?" he asked. The real fear. Not money, not headlines. Abandonment. I held his hands. "I'm not going anywhere." Andrew inhaled sharply at that. Because in that single promise, something irreversible shifted. Ethan nodded once, satisfied, and allowed me to guide him back toward his room. As I turned off the hallway light, I could feel Andrew watching us. He had always believed power was measured in contracts and capital. He forgot something fundamental. Children measure stability in presence, and tonight, for the first time, Ethan saw which parent was steady. By 8:12 a.m., the market knew something was wrong. Andrew hadn't even left the penthouse yet when his phone began vibrating non-stop on the marble kitchen counter. Text messages, Slack notifications, missed calls from the Park Avenue office, the kind of digital panic that spreads before anyone admits there's a fire. Lawson Development Group opened 2 points down. That wasn't catastrophic, but it was unusual. Andrew stood near the window, staring at his Bloomberg terminal on the large screen mounted across the living room. The red ticker line crawled slowly beneath the company name, flashing modest but noticeable declines. "Who talked?" he demanded. "No one had to," I said calmly. "Internal compliance flags automatically notify the audit committee." He turned toward me sharply. "Ako, you triggered this?" I followed protocol. The truth was simpler. When executive expense anomalies pass a certain threshold, the system escalates. I had designed that threshold 5 years ago after a minor procurement scandal nearly embarrassed us in Chicago. Andrew had approved the system. He just never imagined it applying to him. His phone rang again. This time he answered. "What?" he snapped. A pause. "I don't care what the blogs are saying. Issue a holding statement." Another pause. His jaw tightened. "No, there is no investigation. It's routine." He ended the call harder than necessary. "What blogs?" I asked. He didn't respond. Instead, he opened Twitter. A financial analyst account with 40,000 followers had posted a speculative thread. Unusual capital shifts detected at Lawson Development. Executive travel expenses up 240% year over year. Watch this space. Speculation. Not accusation. But in corporate finance, speculation spreads faster than facts. Andrew grabbed his Montblanc pen from the counter, a nervous habit. "You realize what this does to valuation?" "I realize what misused funds do to valuation," I replied. His eyes flared. "If the stock drops, you lose too." "Yes," I said quietly, "but I don't lose my integrity." That word again. Integrity. It irritated him more than the red numbers. Another notification appeared. CNBC had requested comment regarding internal governance concerns. Andrew exhaled sharply. For years, he mastered optics, interviews, headlines, public image. But markets don't respond to charm. They respond to confidence. And this morning, confidence in Andrew Lawson was beginning to erode. Not because of gossip, because of numbers. And numbers, unlike people, don't stay silent when they're manipulated. Andrew always focused on majority control, 51%. That was the number he worshipped. The number that secured board votes, silenced dissent, stabilized perception. As long as he believed he commanded the majority, he believed he commanded reality. What he never questioned was the composition beneath it. The emergency board call was scheduled for noon. By then, internal compliance had formally notified the audit committee. The tone of the morning had shifted from denial to containment. Andrew was pacing when Samuel spoke. "There's something else," my attorney said calmly. Andrew stopped. "What now?" I slid a thin envelope across the kitchen island. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just paper. He opened it impatiently. Inside were formation documents for Bennett Capital Holdings, LLC. He skimmed the first page without concern. Then he reached the ownership schedule. His eyes slowed. "What is this?" he asked, though he already understood. "It's 18%, I answered. 18% of Lawson Development stock had been quietly purchased over the past 3 years from retiring early investors. Minority stakeholders Andrew considered insignificant. The transactions were clean, fully disclosed, market-priced, but they were routed through my LLC. "You used company money?" he snapped. "No," I said evenly. "My compensation, my bonuses, my deferred equity." He stared at me as if seeing someone unfamiliar. "You never told me. You never asked." Silence settled between us, heavier than the skyline outside. For years, Andrew assumed alignment equaled dependency, that because I stood beside him publicly, I must be financially tethered to him privately. He didn't realize I had been building insulation. "You hid this," he said. "I protected myself." Samuel stepped in quietly. "Combined with certain other shareholders, Mrs. Lawson's position materially shifts governance." Andrew looked up sharply. "Other shareholders?" Right on cue, my phone vibrated. A message from Lucas Reed. "Call me before the meeting. We need to discuss next steps." Andrew saw the name on the screen. His expression changed. Lucas owned 22%. A longtime rival Andrew once outmaneuvered during a waterfront acquisition. "You wouldn't," Andrew said slowly. "I would," I replied. For the first time, he understood the arithmetic. 18%, 22%. Together. But that wasn't speculation. That was leverage. And Andrew Lawson had just discovered he no longer controlled the numbers that defined his empire. The board meeting wasn't scheduled in the Park Avenue office. It was moved to a private conference suite at the Plaza Hotel. Optics. Andrew believed controlling the room meant controlling the narrative. Neutral ground, polished mahogany table, bottled water aligned with precision, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Central Park like a painting of stability. By the time we arrived, financial blogs were no longer whispering. They were speculating openly. Governance concerns, capital allocation irregularities, carefully worded headlines, but loud enough. Andrew walked in first, shoulders squared, navy suit flawless, Rolex glinting beneath the chandelier light. He looked every inch the CEO fighting off temporary turbulence. I followed behind him, not as his wife, as a shareholder. Lucas Reed was already seated. He didn't stand when Andrew entered. He simply watched him with quiet interest, fingertips resting on a slim tablet displaying live market movement. "Andrew," Lucas said smoothly. "Rough morning?" Andrew ignored him. "Let's get this over with." The board members filtered in, tension evident in the way they avoided eye contact. No one mentioned the trending analyst thread. No one mentioned CNBC's request for comment. But everyone had read it. Before the meeting began, I stepped into the hallway and answered Lucas's earlier message. "You're sure?" he asked quietly. Yes. This changes everything." "I know." Lucas had lost a major waterfront bid to Andrew 3 years ago, a deal that shifted the company's trajectory. Today, he wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in stability. When we returned to the conference room, Samuel was seated near the end of the table, legal binder open, expression unreadable. Andrew began speaking first. "Routine audit review," he said confidently. "Temporary volatility, nothing material." Lucas leaned back slightly. "Except for the 18%, he said. Murmurs. Andrew's jaw tightened. "What 18%? I placed the documentation on the table. "My 18%. The air shifted. Lucas slid his tablet forward. "Combined with my 22, that represents 40%. I'd add 2 independent directors who have expressed concern." He let the sentence hang. Andrew's composure flickered. "This is corporate sabotage," he snapped. "No," I said evenly. "This is governance." Outside, Central Park remained calm, untouched by the tension inside. But within that polished room at the Plaza Hotel, something irreversible was happening. Andrew thought this meeting would defend his authority. Instead, it was about to measure it. And the numbers were no longer in his favor. The room felt smaller once the numbers were spoken out loud. 40%. That was the combined leverage Lucas and I represented. Not control, but enough to fracture certainty. Enough to make independent directors hesitate. Andrew stood at the head of the mahogany table, palms pressed flat against the surface. "No, you're reacting to rumors," he said sharply. "There is no formal accusation, no regulator involved. We are destabilizing ourselves." One of the independent directors, Margaret Chen, adjusted her glasses. "The issue isn't rumors, it's internal exposure." Samuel spoke without raising his voice. "The audit committee has identified executive expenditures categorized inconsistently with board-approved development initiatives." Andrew turned toward him. "Categorized inconsistently doesn't mean illegal." "No," Samuel replied. "It means risky." Risk. That word always carried weight in this room. Lucas tapped his tablet, projecting a graph onto the screen at the end of the suite. The stock had slipped another half point. "Markets punish uncertainty," Lucas said. "And right now, Andrew, you are uncertainty." Andrew's gaze shifted to me. "This is personal," he accused. "It stopped being personal when corporate funds were involved," I answered calmly. The directors exchanged looks, not emotional, not dramatic, measured. Margaret inhaled slowly. "We need to consider interim leadership while the audit completes." There it was. Andrew laughed once, but it sounded hollow. "You're suspending your CEO over travel expenses?" "No," Lucas said. "Over judgment." Silence fell again. The vote was procedural. Each director, one by one, stated their position. In favor of temporary suspension pending audit review. In favor. In favor. Andrew's face hardened with each word. When it reached Lucas, he didn't hesitate. In favor. Then all eyes moved to me. I had voting authority tied to my shares. For a split second, the history between Andrew and me hovered in the air. The early years, the survival phase, the nights building models on my MacBook at the kitchen table. But governance requires clarity. In favor, I said. The motion passed. Andrew straightened slowly, color draining from his face, not from anger, but from realization. He had spent years believing power meant being untouchable. But power, in truth, is conditional. And in that polished suite at the Plaza Hotel, Andrew Lawson learned something he never anticipated. Authority can be voted away. Madison Vale wasn't in Manhattan. She was in a glass-walled studio in Los Angeles, standing beneath white lights, while a photographer adjusted lenses for a Dior campaign shoot. Stylists moved around her. Assistants whispered. Music pulsed softly through hidden speakers. Her phone kept vibrating. At first, she ignored it. Shoots meant silence. Focus. Expression. But the notifications wouldn't stop. Finally, during a wardrobe change, she checked. Financial blogs, headlines, a trending thread naming Lawson Development. Words like suspension, audit, governance review. And then, her name. Not in bold, not front and center, but mentioned. California. LC, reportedly linked to executive travel allocations. Her stomach dropped. She stepped away from the noise and called the attorney she had quietly retained 2 days earlier. "I need you to tell me something honestly," she said, pacing near the balcony overlooking the Los Angeles skyline. "If my name is on a company tied to corporate funds, what does that make me?" The answer came calmly. "It depends what you knew." Madison closed her eyes. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought it was taxes, branding. He said it was normal. Do you have proof of that? Texts, emails, voicemails." Andrew had always been careful, but not invisible. Back in Manhattan, Andrew's phone rang repeatedly as well. He declined her call. Once, twice, 3 times. He was busy drafting a public statement, insisting on temporary leave, emphasizing cooperation, damage control. But for Madison, this wasn't public relations. It was survival. When he finally texted her, "We'll handle this. Don't speak to anyone." It didn't sound protective. It sounded directive, controlling. She reread the articles again. Suspension pending audit. Potential regulatory inquiry. That word lingered. Inquiry. Madison had entered Andrew's world believing she was stepping into luxury. Private flights, 5-star suites at the Ritz-Carlton, quiet promises about future investments. And now she saw something different. Paper trails, liability, exposure. Her attorney's voice echoed in her mind. "If you didn't know, distance yourself immediately." For the first time since Andrew had swept her into a life of curated elegance, Madison understood a harsh truth. She wasn't his partner. She was his buffer. And buffers are the first things sacrificed when pressure builds. Andrew had handled crises before, failed bids, market downturns, political zoning delays. He knew how to redirect attention, how to control messaging, how to outlast headlines. But this wasn't external pressure. This was documentation. By late afternoon, the audit committee had requested a formal review of executive expenditures over the past 12 months. That request alone sent a quiet tremor through the Park Avenue office tower. In the penthouse, Andrew sat alone at the kitchen island, sleeves rolled up, laptop open. His Mont Blanc pen lay beside a yellow legal pad filled with strategic notes, talking points, timelines, explanations. He still believed narrative could fix this. Then his email chimed. Subject: Supplemental findings. Audit committee review. Attached were scanned invoices Samuel had already hinted at. Private jet charters labeled West Coast Development Site Review. Luxury suite reservations at the Ritz-Carlton coded under Investor Engagement. Luxury jewelry charged as Executive Client Gift. Each line item had been technically processed, but none of them aligned with board-approved initiatives. Andrew leaned back slowly. The problem wasn't just the spending, it was the pattern. Consistent, repeated, categorized in ways that suggested intent to obscure. He opened his internal dashboard, attempting to trace the entries, looking for ambiguity he could leverage. There wasn't any. Compliance timestamps showed override permissions used under his executive authority. Digital signatures verified access credentials, his credentials. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't media. It was a message from one of the independent directors. "Andrew, if this escalates to regulatory attention, we must demonstrate full cooperation." Regulatory attention. The phrase settled heavily in his chest. He had always operated close to the edge, pushing boundaries in negotiations, maximizing flexibility in expense allocations, but he had never believed the line itself would turn visible. He stood and walked toward the window, staring down at the traffic crawling along Fifth Avenue below. For the first time, the city didn't feel like a backdrop he commanded. It felt indifferent. His phone lit up again. Another notification. Madison Vale had retained independent counsel. Andrew stared at the screen longer than necessary. Not because he was surprised, but because he understood what it meant. The illusion of alignment was collapsing. And when allies begin hiring lawyers, the crisis is no longer strategic. It's structural. By the second morning, it wasn't just internal. It was public. CNBC ran a cautious segment at 7:42 a.m. Lawson Development CEO temporarily suspended amid governance review. No accusations, no drama. Just facts. The kind that settle into investor confidence like cracks in glass. Andrew watched it alone. The penthouse felt colder without the noise of control. His suit jacket hung over a chair. His Rolex sat untouched beside his laptop. He hadn't shaved. Then the official letter arrived. Not from media. Not from a blogger. From counsel representing the audit committee. Subject: preservation notice and executive review. Attached were instructions requiring him to preserve all electronic communications, expense records, and internal correspondence related to California holdings and executive travel. Preservation notice. It wasn't a charge, but it wasn't casual either. Andrew scrolled through the attachment, jaw tightening. The language was precise, neutral, legal. Failure to comply may result in further action. Further action. He exhaled slowly and reached for his phone. He called me. I let it ring twice before answering. "Claire," he began, voice controlled but thinner than before. "This has gone far enough." "No," I replied evenly. "It's just begun. You're escalating this into something it doesn't need to be." "I didn't escalate," I said. "The records did." Silence. "You realize if regulators step in, everyone gets scrutinized," he warned. "I have nothing to hide." That unsettled him more than defiance. In the background of the call, he could hear faint movement. Ethan's voice asking about school, the ordinary rhythm of morning life, stability. Andrew lowered his tone. "We can settle this privately. You'll get a generous agreement. We protect the company." There it was, control disguised as compromise. "You already had a generous agreement," I said quietly. "You chose to violate it." He didn't argue, because he couldn't. The preservation notice wasn't about revenge, it was about responsibility. And for the first time in his career, Andrew Lawson understood a reality he had always avoided. Power insulates you, until documentation removes the insulation. Once the paper trail becomes formal, you don't negotiate optics. You answer questions. And those questions were no longer coming from me. Andrew didn't schedule the meeting through attorneys. He showed up himself. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. I was seated at the dining table, reviewing updated projections on my MacBook, when the door unlocked. He stepped inside slowly this time. No confidence, no sharp edges, just fatigue. "You could have called," I said without looking up. "I didn't want this filtered through lawyers," he replied. That alone told me how serious it had become. He removed his jacket and placed it carefully over a chair, as if restoring order to something that no longer existed. The city outside moved in steady rhythm. Traffic along Fifth Avenue, distant sirens, life continuing. "I made mistakes," he said finally, Not denial, not deflection. Mistakes. I closed the laptop. What kind? I asked. He hesitated. I blurred lines. I shouldn't have moved money the way I did. It was temporary. I meant to correct it. Temporary. As if intent erased impact. You didn't forget, I said quietly. You prioritized. His eyes lifted to mine. There was no anger now, only calculation fading into something closer to regret. I felt. He paused, searching. Invisible. The irony almost stunned me. Invisible? I repeated. You ran everything. The compliance systems, the cash flow strategy. The board trusted you. I built the brand, but you held the structure. And that threatened you? I asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped closer. Claire, we can fix this. Withdraw the pressure. Quiet the audit. We restructure privately. I'll step back temporarily if you want. If you want. As if leadership were a marital favor. This isn't about humiliation, I said calmly. It's about governance. He exhaled sharply. You're willing to destroy me over this? No, I answered. You're facing consequences. The word landed harder than anger ever could. For a moment, the silence between us wasn't hostile. It was heavy with recognition, the kind that comes when illusions collapse. You don't have to do this, he said, softer now. I looked past him toward the skyline. I already did. Andrew Lawson had mastered acquisition, negotiation, expansion. But apology? That required surrender. And surrender was the one thing he had never practiced. The Manhattan Supreme Court did not feel cinematic. There were no flashing cameras inside, no dramatic gasps, no raised voices echoing across polished floors. Just fluorescent lighting, muted footsteps, and a row of wooden benches worn smooth by years of quiet decisions. Andrew arrived first. Dark suit, controlled expression. The public version of himself restored carefully, as if reputation could be tailored back into place. His attorney sat beside him, flipping through a leather-bound portfolio. When I entered with Samuel, I didn't look at Andrew. I wasn't there as a wife. I was there as a claimant. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, intimate, almost indifferent. Divorce at this level isn't spectacle, it's documentation. The judge reviewed the file methodically. Prenuptial agreement, fiduciary breach clause, audit committee findings, suspension vote. There were no accusations of infidelity spoken aloud, no mention of Beverly Hills, or models, or private jets. Those details were irrelevant here. What mattered were numbers. Mrs. Lawson is seeking enforcement of Clause 14 under material breach, the judge summarized. Samuel stood calmly. Yes, Your Honor. Documented corporate misallocation materially impacted jointly held interests and public valuation. Andrew's attorney attempted restraint. The expenditures were recoverable. There was no criminal finding. The judge nodded. This is not a criminal proceeding. A pause. However, she continued, executive misuse of corporate funds, when tied to fiduciary obligations outlined in a prenuptial agreement, qualifies as material breach under New York law. Andrew didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead. The ruling was precise. Enforcement of the breach clause. $1 million in compensatory damages. Preservation of Mrs. Lawson's independent equity holdings. Joint custody structured with primary residence stability for the minor child. Clean. Measured. Final. The gavel didn't slam dramatically. It simply tapped. And that was it. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, but not in swarms. A few financial correspondents. Quiet questions about governance, not gossip. Andrew paused near the steps. Was it worth it? He asked without turning. I answered without hesitation. Yes. Because this wasn't revenge, it was alignment. And in that understated courtroom, Beneath ordinary lighting and procedural language, something far greater than money had been decided. Accountability. The court ruling settled the divorce. It did not settle the fallout. 3 days after the hearing, a certified envelope arrived at Andrew's temporary Tribeca apartment. Not from me, not from the board, from the Securities and Exchange Commission. The letter was clinical in tone, no accusations, no dramatic language. Just notice of inquiry regarding executive expense classifications and potential disclosure inconsistencies during prior earnings statements. Inquiry, not indictment, but close enough to alter breathing patterns. Andrew read the first paragraph twice, then a third time. His once commanding penthouse view had been replaced by a narrower skyline framed by smaller windows. The silence in the apartment felt different, less powerful, more exposed. He called his attorney immediately. "This is preliminary," she told him, "but you need full cooperation. No defensiveness. No deletion of records." Deletion. The word lingered. "I didn't break the law," he insisted. "That's not the question right now," she replied. "The question is whether your actions create regulatory risk." Meanwhile, at the Park Avenue office, the board issued a controlled public statement announcing interim leadership restructuring. My name appeared in the second paragraph. Chief Financial Officer, appointed acting CEO, pending final review. The market responded quietly but steadily, up 1 point, then another. Confidence doesn't roar back. It rebuilds. That afternoon, when I stood in the executive conference room for the first time, not as support, but as authority. The skyline reflected across the glass wall behind me. Directors listened without interruption. "We focus on transparency," I said. "Audit completion, investor communication, stabilization. No theatrics, no vengeance, just structure." Across town, Andrew folded the SEC letter carefully and placed it on the kitchen counter beside an untouched espresso. He had once believed the divorce was the battle. It wasn't. The divorce was consequence. This was accountability extending beyond personal failure. Reputation can survive gossip. It struggles under investigation. And for the first time in his career, Andrew Lawson understood something fundamental. You can charm a room. You can negotiate a contract. But you cannot negotiate with documentation once it reaches federal review. The illusion was gone. Only record remained. Andrew asked to see Ethan on a Sunday afternoon. No lawyers, no court-appointed mediators. Just a quiet cafe near Central Park, where families blended into the ordinary rhythm of weekend life. He arrived early, dressed simply this time. No tailored statement. No visible watch flashing beneath the light. When Ethan walked in beside me, he hesitated. Not out of fear, out of adjustment. Andrew stood slowly. "Hey, buddy." Ethan nodded, but didn't run forward the way he used to. We sat outside. Autumn air moved gently through the trees. A waitress placed hot chocolate in front of Ethan and coffee in front of Andrew. Steam rose quietly between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Andrew cleared his throat. I know things have been confusing." Ethan stared into his cup. "Are you in trouble?" he asked. Andrew inhaled carefully. "I made mistakes at work." Ethan looked up. "Mom said grown-ups fix problems." There it was again. Simple truth. Andrew nodded. "That's what I'm trying to do." Silence settled, but it wasn't hostile. It was honest. "I didn't mean to make things messy," Andrew added. "Not dramatic, not rehearsed." Ethan studied him, measuring tone the way children do when they don't yet trust words. "You left," he said quietly. Andrew's shoulders lowered. "I did." Mom stayed. The statement wasn't accusation. It was observation. Andrew's gaze drifted briefly toward me. I didn't intervene. This wasn't about blame. It was about ownership. "I shouldn't have left," Andrew said finally. Ethan nodded once, absorbing it. "No, are you still my dad?" he asked. Andrew blinked quickly. "Always." That answer came without hesitation. For the first time in weeks, something softened. Not the situation, not the consequences, but the clarity. Power had shifted. Titles had changed. Investigations were ongoing. But this moment wasn't about governance or stock movement or legal clauses. It was about presence. Andrew reached across the small table slowly. Ethan let him take his hand. Not because everything was fixed, but because truth had finally entered the room. And sometimes, for a child, that is the beginning of repair. The first Monday as acting CEO did not come with celebration. No champagne, no applause, no congratulatory headlines. It came with a 7 a.m. strategy call, a stack of revised projections, and a board expecting stability. I arrived at the Park Avenue office before sunrise. The lobby lights reflected softly against polished stone floors, and the security guard greeted me differently now. Not warmly, not cautiously, but respectfully. The executive conference room felt the same. But the chair at the head of the table felt different. I didn't sit immediately. Instead, I stood by the window overlooking Manhattan, watching the skyline shift from gray to gold. Cities don't collapse because of scandal. They adapt. They reorganize. So do companies. "Let's begin," I said once the directors had gathered. No one questioned my authority. The audit committee provided updates. Expense categories were being reclassified. Investor briefings were scheduled. Transparency statements drafted. I spoke clearly, without overcorrection. "We are not in crisis," I said. "We are in recalibration." Numbers were projected onto the large screen. Cash reserves remained strong. Core developments were intact. The fundamentals had always been solid. Andrew had endangered perception, not foundation. After the meeting, I returned to my office, formerly adjacent to his, now reassigned. My MacBook sat open on the desk, financial models steady beneath rows of clean formulas. For years, I operated in shadow, not because I lacked capability, because I believed partnership required quiet strength. Now, quiet strength required visibility. My phone buzzed. A message from Lucas. Market closing positive. Investors responding well to transparency. Short. Professional. No grand gestures. I allowed myself a single measured exhale. Rebuilding isn't dramatic. It's disciplined. It's spreadsheets revised at midnight. It's investor calls, where tone matters more than volume. It's refusing to rush redemption for optics. Later that afternoon, an internal memo went out. Effective immediately, Lawson Development Group reaffirms its commitment to fiduciary responsibility and ethical governance. My name signed beneath it. Not as wife, not as survivor, as leader. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with ordinary momentum. Inside, something steadier had replaced illusion. Control built on ego collapses loudly. Control built on accountability endures quietly. And quiet endurance, I was learning, is the stronger form of power. The noise faded gradually, not all at once, not dramatically. Media interest shifted to the next corporate tremor. Analysts updated projections. The SEC inquiry remained ongoing but procedural. No headlines, no spectacle. For the first time in months, there was space. On a cool Saturday morning, I walked through Central Park with Ethan, the air crisp and clear. Leaves scattered along the path, gold against gray pavement. He rode slightly ahead on his bike, glancing back every few seconds to make sure I was still there. I was. We stopped near a bench overlooking the lake. He unwrapped a pastry from a small paper bag, chocolate smudging his fingers. "Are you still busy all the time?" he asked casually. "I'm busy," I answered, "but not distracted." He nodded, satisfied with the distinction. While he watched rowboats drift across the water, I opened a book I had started weeks earlier, but never finished. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. The pages were underlined, not because they were dramatic, but because they were grounding. You have power over your mind, not outside events. For years, I believed control meant preventing damage. Now I understood it meant responding without panic. My phone vibrated gently. A message from Lucas. Coffee later? No agenda. I looked at the skyline visible through bare branches. Not as a battlefield. Not as proof of victory. As landscape, I typed back. 1 hour. Central Park, South. Not because I needed rescue, not because I needed validation, but because rebuilding includes allowing new chapters. Ethan finished his pastry and sat beside me. Are you happier? He asked. The question caught me off guard. Yes, I said honestly. Quieter. He leaned against my arm without hesitation. There had been legal filings, board votes, financial exposure, loss of illusion. But this quiet bench, this ordinary Saturday, felt like resolution. St. Andrew was navigating consequences. Investigations move slowly. Reputations recover unevenly. But accountability had already reshaped the outcome. The empire still stood. So did I. Not louder, stronger. And for the first time since the night he returned expecting forgiveness, I understood something clearly. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of clarity. 6 months later, Manhattan looked the same. Glass towers still reflected the Hudson. Traffic still crawled along Fifth Avenue. The Park Avenue office still carried the Lawson name across its lobby wall. But inside, everything had shifted. The SEC inquiry concluded with civil penalties and mandated governance reforms. No criminal charges. No prison headlines. Just fines, restrictions, and a permanent note attached to Andrew Lawson's executive record. For in corporate America, that note is louder than scandal. He resigned officially 3 weeks after the ruling, not in anger, in inevitability. The board accepted. The statement was brief. Mutual decision. Forward-looking leadership. The language of polite endings. On his final day, Andrew cleared his office quietly. No farewell speech. No handshake tour. A cardboard box replaced the polished authority he once carried. As he exited through the lobby, he paused briefly. Across the marble floor, I was walking in. Not triumphantly. Not theatrically. Simply on time. We stopped a few feet apart. The silence between us wasn't hostile anymore. It was factual. You did what you thought was right, he said. I did what was necessary, I replied. He nodded once. I hope it was worth it. I didn't answer immediately. Through the glass doors behind him, the skyline stretched wide and unbothered. It was, I said finally. Not because he lost, but because I no longer had to shrink. Upstairs, the executive floor felt lighter. Transparent governance protocols were in place. Investor confidence had stabilized. The stock chart, once volatile, now moved in steady increments. Later that evening, I walked along Central Park South, where Lucas was waiting outside a quiet restaurant. Nothing extravagant, no spectacle, just dinner. He smiled, not possessively, not strategically. You look different, he said. I am. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a real one. Andrew faced consequence. Madison rebuilt privately, away from headlines. Ethan slept peacefully, secure in consistency. And I stood not as someone avenged, but as someone aligned. So power built on ego collapses. Power built on accountability endures. And as the Manhattan skyline glowed against the darkening sky, I understood the final truth of it all. I didn't win because he fell. I won because I stood. And just like that, the story comes to an end. But my wonderful friends, if you're still here with me right now, if you've stayed through every twist, every quiet courtroom moment, every painful truth, and every steady rebuild, then something in this story touched your heart. And that matters. Maybe what stayed with you isn't the million-dollar divorce. Maybe it isn't the boardroom vote or the investigation. Maybe it's something quieter. The realization that power is not about control, it's about character. That accountability, though painful, is healing. That standing firm doesn't require shouting. The Stoics taught us something timeless. You have power over your mind, not outside events. What Claire learned wasn't revenge, it was alignment. She couldn't control betrayal. She couldn't control headlines. But she could control her response. And that response changed everything. In life, we don't always win by overpowering others. Sometimes we win by refusing to abandon ourselves, by protecting our integrity, by staying present for our children, by choosing clarity over chaos. So if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own quiet strength, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that heal, empower, and remind us that accountability is not destruction. It's transformation. And if you're still here, thank you. That tells me your heart understands. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment, educational reflection, and storytelling purposes only. All characters, companies, legal situations, and corporate events portrayed in this video are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real individuals, businesses, investigations, or legal proceedings is purely coincidental. The financial, legal, and corporate elements described are dramatized to create a compelling narrative and should not be interpreted as factual reporting, financial advice, legal guidance, or commentary on any real organization. The purpose of this content is to explore themes of accountability, integrity, leadership, and personal growth through fictional storytelling. Viewers are encouraged to seek qualified professionals for real-life legal, financial, or personal matters. This channel is dedicated to sharing meaningful, character-driven drama that inspires reflection and positive life lessons. 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 Positive life lessons.
And there's people having lectures. Flower arranging. My mum used to pick flowers every day from the garden, cut flowers, put them in vase. Fuck me. Oh, sorry, Jack, can't afford your tennis racket. We've got to spend all the money on a ramp and a motorised wheelchair for this money-grabbing little fucking... Why do you need a motorised one? No arms. That's fair enough. That is fair enough. I can tell some of you feel a bit uncomfortable laughing at little Timmy, who's a little 6-year-old lad. He's got a funny little voice because his chest is all fucked. Got no arms, no legs, just like stumps, right? But let me tell you something about Timmy to make you feel better about yourselves. He's a fucking racist. Yes. Horrible little shit, he is. You little fucking bigot. You disgusting little fucking racist, you racist scum, you filthy little fucking, you fascist, you fucking, you disgust me. Homophobic? Yeah. He's like, they're not like us. Nothing's like you disgusting little fucking, you prejudiced little piece of, you ball of hate, you disgusting little fucking racist homophobe. I wish we'd had a scan. You absolute, misogynist. If he could, he'd rape. There's your little Timmy.